welcome back to another edition of StreamTime Sports. I'm your host, Nick Meacham, and thrilled to be joined by a previous guest who is actually based in my homeland. And now when I speak to people in Australia, typically, I always have the daunting task of trying to get the time zones managed and trying to get a call managed. And in the UK, when I lived in the UK, that was difficult enough. Well, then it turns out that somehow it's even more difficult to get in Jamaica. But I am thrilled to be joined by Antarina from Aura. Now, last time I think we spoke, it was my morning, your evening. You had a glass of wine open. This time, it's my evening. Your midday, I think, around lunchtime, I think, at this stage. So good that we've sort of flipped the script a little bit, but great to have you back on the show, Ant.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I'm stoked for this time zone, by the way, because, living here and dealing with a lot of people in Europe and North America, I'm often up very early or very late. So this time I just have a glass of water. We'll save. It's past midday. I could go get a wine, but we'll save it for later.
Good stuff. No, I have now got a better understanding and a real appreciation for those that are really working globally, especially for Australia, because Australia is such a great melting pot of innovative businesses and entrepreneurs and people who have had real international impact. And I now really good appreciate they really have to burn the candle at both ends to make it work because of the time zone challenges. So, which we can talk obviously a little bit about what you guys are doing at a global scale, but I think it's good to set the scene for those that aren't familiar that it is really a graft for those in Australia trying to build something internationally. A lot of people have come through the industry from Australia and have some pretty incredible impact. Sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if you haven't heard, next month we're heading to Manhattan for Sports Pro New York. On the 18th and 19th of March, you can hear from industry innovators such as Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, Candle Media CEO and former top Disney executive Kevin Mayer, and LPGA Tour Commissioner Molly Marku Saman. Come to be inspired and learn how to successfully navigate the major opportunities in sports media. Book your place today at newyork.sportspro.com, and listeners to this podcast can get 20% off by using the code PODCAST in capital letters. That's podcast, PODCAST, at checkout. Terms and conditions apply, and this offer is not applicable to pre-existing purchases. Let's jump into about you and indeed about Aura. So last time we spoke, it was a great conversation. We talked a little about what you guys were doing around the platform space, particularly how you guys were really taking a different approach to how you could engage audiences, not only around content, but indeed fan engagement more generally on an owned and operated platform. You're obviously one of the best explainers of not only what you guys do, but indeed people obviously present at events. So I'm going to hand the keys over to you a little bit to sort of describe you guys a little bit better, particularly where you were and now where you are over those last couple of years. So, and just talk us through what's changed since we had you last on.
A lot is the short answer. It's just such a wild journey of trying to create a business like what we're trying to do with Aura. And from an idea to get it to be globally commercially viable, hands down the most challenging thing I think I've ever attempted. The Australia thing is definitely a thing. It's really difficult. I mean, it's been really rewarding to build a team here. There's just some really clever people. I think there's a Australian cultural attitude of to try and disrupt, because we're often just sort of seen as the people on the other side of the planet. But at some point, we're started to expand now. We have some staff in London, staff in New York. It's very high on the cards that I will relocate personally, sort of sooner rather than later this year sometime. And I think London's probably the choice on that. So I'll take your old place or something, Nick. And so that could be fun family adventure. I've got 3 kids and just to do something a little bit different, but also to really drive the next sort of evolution of the business. In terms of what we've done the last 2 years, it's been a journey. I mean, the last time we spoke was actually our last tech stack. We had to learn the lessons, and I think we made a bunch of mistakes. We were probably too far ahead of the market in terms of the type of tech, the types of features potentially. But what we're seeing now is the market is really catching up in a very sort of very quick manner, in particular because of things like AI becoming so sort of prevalent. Everyone's thinking a little bit more like, oh, hold on, this is very disruptive and what's next? To take one step back though, and maybe some people might have heard the first podcast, but I'll start there. We had built a next generation streaming platform on a video game engine. It was literally a video game that could stream content. And it's still one of the coolest things I've seen in terms of, visually appealing, the interactivity and engagement. The challenging part of it that just took us a little while, because you have to build something and then take it to market and test it, is I could get senior leadership really excited. I could get product guys excited, marketing guys excited, guys or girls, I should say. And then I would get to the CTO and they would be like, no, this is not happening. And the reason for that is that stack and the way that it works is these potential clients would have to completely re-platform. So you've got all this existing tech that you've invested into. Our hypothesis was this is next generation. It's super cool. Maybe it'll be kind of dominoes where you'll get one person will take a punt on it. I felt very confident that we could deliver something unbelievably cool, and other people would see that and go, I want that as well. And then you start to move into a new generation of tech. And that just, to be fair, that just didn't happen. The hurdles to overcome, the political nature of those things, I think I probably naively massively underestimated. But one thing I think I'm pretty good at is building relationships. And I mean, that's actually been the blessing in all of this. I've got a massive global network of just some really wonderful people that I can now call upon and bounce ideas off and sort of test some of these hypotheses before I go crazy building all these things. The last stack was a legacy thing, I should say. Like, we had built our own direct-to-consumer product, and we had bought some rights, and we tested a whole bunch of stuff, and actually tested really, really well. So when we switched from this is sort of during COVID, and leagues were shutting down left, right, and center, and so we had a bunch of subscribers, and we had to, they all vanished overnight, basically. So our revenue sort of vanished, and we went, okay, we better switch this into just to survive from a D2C into a B2B one. And so we tried to take that Unity stack to make that B2B. So that is actually the main error that we made. We probably should have reconfigured everything then. So 2 years ago, that's what I was talking about. And there was excitement because, again, you show people this stuff and visually it's very appealing. And so we could always generate excitement in the initial conversations, but it was really difficult to get a deal done. Somehow, we were able to survive through that. We had to sort of go back to the drawing board to some degree. There's a lot of core ideas that we were doing then that we are doing now in just a different way. A lot of that was around aggregation and bringing different elements into one environment and then having either a curated or semi-curated experience, allowing the fan to kind of navigate their way through. We still 100% believe that that's the right sort of strategy. We just had to nail the tech component of it. And what we focused on and what we've been doing for the last few years, we've been pretty quiet, I would say, is rebuilding, in particular, the front end to be as modular and as integratable as possible. So all of the smarts around how our stuff does what it does predominantly sits in the back end. A lot of that was kind of there. We did have to adapt a lot of things. And so getting into sort of mid last year was really when we were like, okay, we've got something pretty interesting here. We moved away from the video game technology sitting at the core because it was the thing that made it challenging to integrate. And we've gone to a more approachable sort of stack. So if we're not going to be able to deliver the same types of massively visual features that we could do on the Unity stack, then we had to think really creatively around where is the point of difference and what is the value. At the same time as we were building this out, you get this push in AI technology evolving that we already had a bunch of ideas. There were things that we were creating, and it just accelerated our ability to exploit some of those ideas in really, really interesting ways. So the current stack that we're taking to market now, there's two parts to it. One is we've added a little kind of moniker onto our logo, which is an OS. And the OS is not an operating system, as many might think right away. And an operating system is kind of an aggregation of hardware components and getting something hardware to work. And a trend that we're noticing in other verticals that we're trying to bring into this space is OS as an orchestration system. and make that a bit more of a public. It's known in tech circles, but how do we make it a bit more of a public kind of name? So we sort of have this kind of Aura OS core platform, which is an orchestration system. When I was reading about that, I was like, this is exactly what we do. So we take disparate systems, and what I mean by that is any client might have contents over here, data's over there, social somewhere else, or community-based features. And then they're trying to find, trying to find new ways to generate revenue. And the typical models at the moment, the previous one was subscription and the new one is fast. I'll happily put it out there. I'm not a fan of fast at all. It's basically TV, and I don't think it might be the right thing in the short term for next quarter's budget and cash flow, but I don't think it's the right user experience. We're dealing with a client at the moment who has massive churn, and churn is an issue because they run an ad every time you basically do anything. You have to watch the ad before, but the app has an issue of crashing constantly. And so you watch the ad, then it crashes, then you have to watch the ad again. So people just get quite frustrated. So we want to think more creatively with brands have a place to play and ads have a place to play within this type of environment. But how can you make that more interactive? Like, I want people to look forward to the ad, and you can use different technologies. Like we can run AR experiences and run brand activations. And that might be a more interesting way to think about that. So between subscription and fast are the two kind of main models at the moment. We think a little bit more broadly around that, sport as an ecosystem. A lot of the leagues have sold off their rights to certain things, and that might be merchandise, ticketing, e-commerce more broadly, Web3. There's a whole bunch of different areas that, and so we want to bring that back into one place. And it doesn't mean that, if you've got a deal with a merch supplier, you can just aggregate them back into the environment and still just generate sales out of there, but you're delivering the best user experience. That's all our quest is in all of this. When we work through as a company, what's our why? And our why is just to push the boundaries. And, sometimes we might have pushed it a bit far. That's okay. We can bring it back. But, our roadmap is pretty exciting, and the stuff that's in there. So I mentioned Aura OS. We have another, there's another product I've been working on separately that has we can use for Aura OS, and it's an AI contextual engine. This is the most buzzwordy you'll ever hear me get. And what it does is it basically supercharges what we can do with Aura to break down and reconfigure an experience on device down to an individual user level. And so there's some seriously, when I present this stuff, the feedback is really, really good because, and generally it's like no one's really thinking in this space, in particular from an AI perspective. And when I say it's buzzwordy, there's a little bit more than AI kind of that sits sort of within it. There's a few different technical protocols that we're bringing to life. But the idea is there's an input and an output. The input is how can you collect masses of data, both from history, preferences, down to individual interactions in real time, understand and process that and feed that back into an adaptive UI to reconfigure an experience based on what someone is currently doing. That's a very long-winded way to do it. Normally I present this and show it visually, and then people go, oh, okay, right, now I understand what you're doing. But to give you an example, imagine you've got your favorite player from, let's say, any sport. And so when you open up the homepage, the system knows that's your favorite player. So you're going to get news on that player, maybe highlights from that player. When you want to interact and say, okay, show me the next game, it's going to show you how your favorite player, maybe, or your team has performed against that other team or in that location, or if there's weather factors, whatever it might be. And if you interact with that team, it's going to then break out and show you more about the players. And maybe then it's about the gear. So if it's motorsport, it might be like, here's the car, a 3D model or a model of the car. And here's the package that they're running this weekend. And this is where the downforce is coming from. And so the system through the AI modeling will start to build out a narrative. And so we can bias that engine to contextualize an experience based on business objectives. So if the client says, okay, our focus this quarter is to build community, then we can bias that engine to take people on a narrative to build community. Maybe it will be to build session time, grow session time. So we can bias it to do that. Maybe it's to generate more sales of ticketing or whatever it might be. we have very firm guardrails on that. The reason for that is that I don't want, like, there might be some person who is not making their budget for the quarter and says, "Oh, let's dial up commercialization, monetization to 11," and it just ruins a user experience. So we will allow the AI to have some, like that small bias, but not too much where it ruins a user experience. That's kind of number one in everything. So, Nick, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but the last 2 years we've been very busy. I mean, we've grown the company. I can't remember how many staff we had back then. I'm going to guess it was probably 25. We're about 60 now. Yeah, it's getting big, and we've had to sort of, grow our capability, grow our skill set. I've had really good partners and investors around that have helped us on that journey. We've landed a couple of pretty decent sized deals and tested some product in market last year that went extremely well, and that revenue is super supportive as we continue to build this stack out. And now we've got significant interest. I've got a trip over to the US in a couple of weeks with all the kind of, the names that you would presume that are really, really interested in kind of where we're at. I've been building those relationships, and people are like, okay, finally, you've got something that we can work with because it's so integratable. And so that's really, really, we're in an exciting spot at the moment.
Fantastic, Ed. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think some interesting things I want to lean into. Firstly, about the platform itself, before we dig into a little bit more about your experience over the last couple of years, just to summarize then, what you started off, you sort of talked about the fact that you started off focusing around the live streaming experience, built on this video gaming engine to recreate and reinvent that experience itself. Now, is the focus still primarily the live streaming experience, or is it much more of a 365 or holistic platform you're talking about, which integrates different types of experiences to keep people coming back to the platform? Because that's what it sounded like. So I just thought I'd try and get my head around that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And, it can be difficult to explain this stuff, especially in like kind of a few minutes on something. It is very visual. But no, look, streaming is a part of what we do, and we can do live streaming. But I can also wrap around. Before you had to use our stuff. Now I can wrap around anything. If someone's using Endeavor or BitMoving, or we can just wrap around and deliver our features to them and bring that to life. We definitely have a holistic 365 view. I mean, all of the data that we're seeing is there is a generation coming through that do not care about the live game. I mean, Roger, our friend Rog will talk about this till he's blue in the face, and he's right. And we're seeing it in the data as well. And it just means that different generations will consume those experiences in different ways. So certain generations might be like fantasy I always talk about it in the sense of there's an anchor that gets a particular fan excited about that sport. So it could be fantasy for someone. It could be the live game. It could just be highlights. It could be fashion and what's trending in social that will attract certain audiences. And so when we talk about AI configuring an experience, the system needs to understand who that person is. And that's why it needs to be down to an individual level, because then it can configure itself based to move them through those business objectives, because it understands the priority of things that are important to them. And right now, everyone would say, well, content's king. And it is to some degree, but for some people and some audiences coming through, maybe it's not. And I think that's where, there is a shift happening that's pretty dramatic, I think, in the industry, and the types of conversations that we're having now, where people are starting to think, hold on, business is good now, but the light at the end of the tunnel that was always there is now getting a little kind of grey, and they're going to have to start thinking a little bit more differently and maybe a bit creatively. Everyone cares about data and how much can you know about the fan. And what we're trying to solve for there is I actually am, I say this candidly, but with a little bit in jest, but I think what we're trying to build is something that will make first-party data obsolete, in the sense everyone says that's where the value is, but it's not. The value in the data is the insight that you can pull out based on what currently happens is a user journey or a persona set. Where our system is designed in a way where it will produce that data and consume it in real time. And if we can do that, now the data just becomes the fuel and the engine is what has the value. And if you use the analogy for a car, that makes perfect sense. Whereas right now, everyone says the fuel's the most important thing and the engine's kind of like whatever. That's the shift and the bleeding edge that we're trying to lead. So within that engine, it needs to have as much input into that as possible. How is that person interacting and engaging with social? What are they buying? When are they buying? What content are they viewing? What time of the day are they doing it? What time zone are they? All this stuff becomes really valuable, even down to the point of, can I understand the interaction with the device in real time so that I can contextualize that? So I'm trying to think of a good example around that in particular, that if your goal is to build session time and I'm thinking I can visualize it in my head, how it sits in our semantic branching model on the AI side of things, the system will tokenize every part of the experience. So each one of those inputs, so it could be a page, it could be a piece of content, it could be a data set, whatever. And if you know how someone's physically interacting with that in real time, the system says you're on this token, and it knows which tokens are the most appropriate to reconfigure to kind of in real time after that. That becomes a really, I think about, to give you an analogy on this, Drive to Survive was so good for Formula One because it created these stories and allowed people to feel like they're part of that narrative. We want to do that in the experience in real time. That's the idea, is build those narratives and allow that to become an organic kind of feature.
Interesting. So it sounds like, I don't know if I'm putting words into your mouth here, but like the moving away from first party data allows it to be all about the behavior. The old cliche of actions speak louder than words. You're able to just focus on, it doesn't matter who the user is actually. It doesn't matter what they do. It just matters on what they're actually doing on the platform. Because we talk about who is the fan. Well, it's good to know who the fan is if they're 27 living out down the street in this and engaging with social media or whatever, but doesn't mean everyone's built the same and they have different behaviors. So focusing behavior first rather than just a demo first.
Yeah, I mean, well, we talk about it. You're exactly right. Behavior is important. You need all the other stuff as well. In my mind, I describe it as a shift between personalization and contextualization. So the typical demographic data is personalization. Contextualization is then, what do you actually do with that? So the example I can give on that, let's say, I'll think of a great rivalry, Lakers and Celtics. Now, if I'm an NBA fan, I go onto the app and I'm onboarding, I'll select the Lakers, but I'll also select Boston. But you and I can have this conversation and you know why I've selected Boston, right? Because I want to know when they lose. But in most first-party models, that will be picked up as you're a fan of Boston. And so here's some Boston won today. Here's some content on Boston. Here's some news on Boston, on the Celtics. And that's not what I was after. So we think about that and we've designed the system around that. So, okay, I picked the Lakers and I picked the Celtics, but I'm then consuming content and news and box scores and data for the Lakers. The system will start to recognize and understand that there's rivalries and will say, you're clearly a Lakers fan, which means you want to know when the Celtics lose. Then you get that information coming up into your experience. By the way, Boston got pumped today in the fourth quarter and lost. Great. So that's a very rough example, but contextualization is important because that's where real fandom lies. Not in I just happened to select this thing onboarding or I clicked on something, kind of by accident. We want the system to really try and understand the fan. And if you do that, you can deliver better experiences. And if you do that, you can find new ways to generate revenue streams and make your brand, your whatever it might be, really, really sticky.
So let's talk a bit more about revenue streams then, because that is still the big question, the big challenge for our industry is everyone has a feeling that they know that they are trying to put the fan first. It's become more, I think, of a consensus than it was. I still think there's a lot of work to do, but there's an intent. In a general perspective, we understand now that we just can't build it and they will come. We have to work harder to build their relationship and build it and keep it for the longer term, in particularly in these types of environments. So there's the engagement piece, getting them back on the platform. And let's talk about monetization. You mentioned about subscription and fast as like areas that most of the industry sort of focused on. Are there any areas that you're seeing or you're working on or delivering that are driving a decent spike in ARPU, revenue per user, that you think can be a real needle mover, I suppose, in getting more value out of those consumers?
Yeah, so there's two parts to this. There's one, the product we actually tested where we absolutely saw that. It was a betting company, and so we saw a massive uptick in bets, which, to be frank, was kind of like exciting but terrifying at the same time. To know that you can have that influence on consumer behavior. For something like that, the flip side of that is the hypothesis of again, certain generations very used to buying things online, very used to seeking out things that they want. Like I see that dress or I see those shoes or whatever it might be, and you go and look for those things to purchase. And so for me, the big driver in that can be moving brands from a CPM buy into a CPA buy. So can you understand and contextualize that experience and allow transactions to happen there and then? And if you're a league and you've sold your rights to that stuff, it does not mean that you can't be an affiliate back to your own product partner and clip the ticket along the way, because you're going to know more about that fan than they will. There will be companies out there that say, we probably know more about the fan than the league does. And that's not where that intelligence should lie. I would argue to any league that we talk to that they should be kind of owning that. You can have other people manage the logistics, but there's an opportunity here to contextualize an experience in a way where new revenue streams can be developed very, very easily. So, e-commerce is definitely a big one. Web3, I mean, I've never been a fan of NFTs back in the way that I think, was the kind of bubble. I still think there is value in the technology. Maybe there's some different use cases. We've done some work in the space thinking about NFTs as ticketing, but for me, it's like, where is the value in the NFT? It's not monetary value, certainly not if you want mass adoption. It might be sentimental value, as an example. So I'll give you an example of that. On my desk at work, I have a ticket, like an actual ticket from a 1998 Lakers versus Atlanta game in the Great Western Forum. And I think it was Kobe's second season. And that game, I played a lot of sport. I was playing basketball in the States at that time. I went to that game and I just fell in love with Kobe. I thought he played so well that game. I was like, this guy's the next Jordan. This is in 98. I can't remember how many points he had. And I know they played Atlanta. I can't remember exactly who else was on the team. Shaq was on the team. I can't remember exactly who I went to the game with. I was there with a team and I remember a couple of the guys, but I can't remember everything. So I lose the value other than I have this sticker stub that sits on my desk, and there's some blurred kind of memories because this is obviously, I'm an old man now comparatively to then. So imagine if the ticket could be an NFT, and the NFT now gets, you get that, you keep that digitally, and what gets tied to that is a box score of the game, some of the key highlights, and then you can create some user generated content, like you take your kid there and you take your photo, and that all gets stitched into that NFT and sits in a digital ecosystem that you can go and check out anytime you want. So when and that's also very valuable to those clubs and to those and leagues, because you're going to start to understand who's at the game, how often do you go, who are you there with, and if people start you can tie that into loyalty programs, all sorts of different stuff. So we think about generating new revenue streams in very different ways. You can now sell a ticket, or you can sell a ticket plus the other stuff that becomes this kind of piece of memorabilia, and there's value in that to the fan. So you can charge for that, plus you're also getting more data out of it.
But it's shifting the I guess the focus from what much of the sports industry had around NFTs at the time when they first hit the market was just a cash cow. You're looking at it. It's just as important as an engagement tool for someone like you who's got this piece of memorabilia, right? And I think that's the bit that does have some real value if the industry keeps looking through that lens about building a true relationship with the fan.
Yeah, I mean, we just think about it. Where are the wins? So you want to think about what is, and we are very fan first. Some leagues might talk that they are, and maybe they are, maybe they're not quite, or they're on the path to kind of get there. And I understand why, because it's a business, right? And sometimes they want to be safe and do things that they've kind of always done. And we try and, to our why, we sort of want to push the boundaries with that. But that's an example, right? That is like, here's a mechanism. You can use emerging technology to create a different experience for an existing product that can generate new revenue streams and additional data flow without being massively disruptive to your existing business. That's how we think within Aura. That's how we think about monetization. When we think about that suite, there are always ways that you can be creative using technology to find new ways to generate revenue. And, when you talk about ARPU, sometimes it's a game of cents and dollars that are in small amounts because you have such scale and volume. And so if you can generate another dollar from every person and you've got 500 million fans, that becomes pretty valuable. And so that's the way that we definitely think about it.
So something like we've talked about so far, and we've talked about a lot about the fan generally, has a level of importance for all layers and spectrums of sports properties, from the biggest to the smallest. They all have a slightly different purpose. The building a platform in your say tier 2, tier 3 sports becomes more important because your sport's really not discoverable anywhere except through social media channels. So I'm just curious from your lens, Anne, do you see any discernible differences in with what, particularly through what you guys have done with how a tier 1 sports property needs to be looking at building a destination and a platform versus say that tier 2, tier 3 sports that doesn't have that extreme exposure through various broadcast mediums that the obvious guys have?
Yeah, I look to a lesser degree. I think because rightly or wrongly, our focus has been on the tier 1 guys, like almost from day one. We've had internal conversations before saying, should we just do a version of Aura that's a light version that is just for clubs? And I feel like we'll get to that at some point in the future, but I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. I mean, my goal in this was to kind of have a swing, swing for the fence. And, I've spoken to other people in the industry in sports tech startups, and I've learned some lessons from those guys. I won't say who they are, but where they had a big, bold vision, and maybe they get like VCs or the wrong type of investors in, and then something doesn't quite work out because you need time to develop these types of ideas if you want to do something big. And what tends to happen is they sort of just get pushed down a certain path, and before you know it, they're so far off the path of where they were trying to get to. And so they lose that vision, and they're just producing a very, very, very watered down product. And I've been very, very careful around not going down that path. It's like, I say this with a big, big smile on my face, but like I've said to our guys, like, we're going to be the most, this spectacular success or catastrophic failure, because what's the point otherwise? Do you know what I mean? Like if I was going to do something and I thought I had to water it down, and especially at this point of it, I might as well just get a job somewhere. If I'm going to do something here, we'll do it really big. And so tier 1 has always been our focus. And what we're noticing, to try and answer your question a little bit better, is a lot of the tier 1 guys, I mean, the NBA, I think, are the leaders in this, where they've got a non-exclusive sort of deal on their rights in most markets, where they've got, they're selling to rights holders, and then they're also to broadcasters, but then they're also producing their own D2C products and monetizing it in different ways. And a lot of leagues are now starting to go, okay, hold on, that's a pretty interesting model. And they certainly understand that there is a fragmentation in the audiences. And so that goes from that could be a nice to have to a necessity, because if the broadcasters who have one model don't adapt to the changes in the demographics that are coming through, that can be a cliff for audience numbers. Then the value of the rights kind of plummets. But if you can manage that and change your experience to cater to those different audiences that are coming through, then that can become it's almost a necessity at some point, I think over the next few years. So that's what we're seeing from a lot of tier 1 guys. And even some of the broadcasters, to be fair, that we're chatting to are like, hey, we know we need to enhance these experiences. It can't just be play an ad, run some video. There's more sort of to it. So yeah, tier 2, tier 3 is definitely on our list, but it's something we'll get to once I feel that we have got full product market fit and product market with tier 1, and then we can look at what those subversions look like.
Interesting. I think one of the things that if you do relocate to somewhere like London and close to Europe, is there is a plethora of tier 2 and tier 3 sports properties in those markets trying to work through how to build better relationships with fans in different ways, shapes and forms. Rights is obviously a different issue when you talk about a club level, because most of the top rights are held up at the league level, but they are still all trying to work it out. At the moment, most of them, I think, are just resorting to using social as their primary platform of choice, quite often reluctantly, because they haven't really have found the ultimate an optimal fit there as well. But talking about the tier 1 side of things, you've mentioned the NBA as one example. Are you guys focused on the sports properties, or also looking at the streaming platforms and general broadcast market? Just what's that mix look like for you guys?
Yeah, we are both, and I mean, I'm cautious of kind of commenting on the tier two stuff, by the way. But I think for us, it was just like we've invested very, very heavily in the stack that we've created, and I think we want to get an initial return before, like any innovation, right? You say we've got to go out, we've got to get a return on that first, on all the R&D and all the stuff that we've done, and then you can find new versions of it. If and so dealing with a tier two is generally more like a budget that's available to actually execute the vision properly. And if a tier two came to me and said, you know what, we've actually got a bit of cash here, we want to have a good swing at this, then I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. So to answer your question, the three areas that we're probably quite focused at the moment: tier one leagues, the broadcasters. We're building those conversations kind of massively at the moment, and obviously there's a huge bit of news that dropped last week, and I think even on that level, that's a massive undertaking. But the way our tech is designed would be very, very interesting, to sit as part of that stack, because if you can understand the individual users and then contextualize an experience from three major players, I was quite excited when I read that, and I've had several people reach out going, "Hey, you should be chatting to this guy and this guy and this guy." And I'm like, "Okay, well, we'll get to that." The third area that is interesting, purely from a commercial perspective, is what's happening with betting. In North America is a driving market at the moment, but I think also globally it's pretty disruptive at the moment, where there's so much competition in that space that people are saying, okay, do we bring in content? Does that help us? Do we use data in different ways? And because most of the betting apps that are out there are very transactional. It's, you know what you want kind of thing, get on, find your, and make your bet. But it's not really how new generations are kind of consuming that stuff. Fanatics are making their play. They've got loyalty as a big part of that and trying to leverage the other assets that they have as a point of difference. And I think that will go to a certain point. Then the user experience, there might be more than that. If it's like, okay, I make a bet, I get some points, eventually I can buy a jersey. There's a line, I reckon, where that is interesting and then becomes maybe a little less interesting. And so there's so much more that's out there. And so that's another area where I get kind of quite excited. What ESPN's done and ESPN Bet is really interesting because they've got access to the streams. And so now it's like, okay, how can you use content and data to allow people to have confidence to make, this is the stuff that we tested last year on a smaller sort of scale. And the feedback the numbers that we saw from just nailing that was pretty dramatic. So they're the three areas that are, we're sort of pretty focused on at the moment. The other thing that's, not that valid to mention to this audience, but we've always thought about our stack as any time you want to aggregate content, data, community, and monetization, we're pretty interesting. And we're starting to branch outside of sport. And so we've landed our first deal in a very well-established, big British company, global company, but based out of London. And so that's becoming pretty exciting. We've got some prototypes into different verticals, and so that's becoming another key focus for us.
It makes a lot of sense, right? I think that you see a lot of the major tech providers and solutions providers in the sports space not just working in sports and for good reason, because the technology and innovation can be really transferable to a lot of different markets. But taking a step back to the journey a little bit, and now, what are the things you said you've learned a lot along the way? There's been challenges, there's been things you've learned. Just what's the experience like, particularly with your background, going in really deep into the sports business side of things? What have you learned about the way the sports industry works, I guess, generally, but indeed how they work and look at these sorts of opportunities?
Oh, wow. That's open up Pandora's box there. Just for what I just mentioned, we got an opportunity in another vertical. We built a prototype in like 4 weeks. We took it to market, tested it. It performed extremely well. Those guys come back to me like the following week and say, we want the full product. We want global exclusivity. Let's go. And I'm like, man, I wish that would happen in sport. I love sport, right? I'm passionate, and there's just great people that work in it. To be fair, it's it's a really fun group of people. I love going to the conferences like Sports Pro, and you kind of see a lot of the same faces, and it's great to catch up with people and get dinners and all that sort of stuff. So there's that kind of human component. But on the business side, it's probably one of the most frustrating industries I think I've ever worked in, because there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of I think connectivity of relationship that, especially coming from Australia, you don't have off the bat. You got to establish those types of relationships where there's some trust. I understand that how important that is. And so that's the area I think I've had to learn myself. I mean, I got a few more white hairs, in the beard and on my head, but to be more patient, like the sales cycles can be pretty insane. And I mean, it's a roller coaster doing this stuff, and you have good days and bad days, but there'll be times like I've worked really hard. I've gotten to know someone for a couple of years. It's coming around for the sales cycle, and then they leave, and you're kind of back to square one because someone else comes in, and so those sales cycles can be super challenging. That said, I also think that's a two-way street, and if we didn't have the right product at the right time, they talk about in business, obviously, like we might be an overnight success of 12 years. That timing is everything, and so I mentioned earlier, like we've had to learn that our product was probably too far ahead of the market, and we don't want to fall behind the market, and we certainly don't want to adjust our product down where it becomes like it might be appropriate to a small part of a market at a particular time, but I would find that soul destroying, to be honest, and that's not what I'm in it for. I'm in it to make an impact and do something kind of, hopefully incredible. So the alignment of those things could be really, really interesting. I think other movement in the technology space can be helpful to us. I think that's what we're seeing now, because when people see just such disruptive technology like what's coming out, with AI, it shifts the mindset and says, okay, what's possible, rather than, I'm sure I've pitched to people and they're like, I don't believe that this is real, or something, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's probably an element of that. And so getting things out in market sort of becomes key. But yeah, the sports industry, mate, is, I think, one of the toughest, but it gives me confidence that if you can succeed there, you can kind of succeed anywhere else.
I think that's a very good sentiment, and I think what you've described is pretty much universally faced by anyone coming with something in the industry, irrespective if they even have been in the industry for a long time, or coming in and have no idea about the industry. It can be or somewhere in between. I think you just continue to see this across the industry, how slow things are to move, and how difficult it is to get that cut through. So the fact that you guys have been able to grow so well over this period and get your feet firmly planted into the sports industry, having such impact, I think is a real testament to what you guys are trying to build, because it is obviously something that the industry does need to get better and better at. Now, talking more about, I guess, some of the experiences you've had, particularly want to look at how different you see, I guess, the regional side of things a little bit. You've come from from the Australian market. You've been working and working with and talking with people in the US, the American market, the hotbed of the media world, and then also Europe, and then no doubt Asia as well. So I know you've been at our events in the APAC region as well. So how different really are those conversations when you're talking to, particularly at the tier one level, on what they're trying to achieve? Or are they fairly uniform these days because they all have similar problems at the top level? Or is it quite mixed?
Yeah, there's a dichotomy with this. I think there's a lot of similarities, but the structure of the leagues, for example, can have a pretty massive difference in an approach. The key, high level example of that is English football or football across Europe has relegation and promotion. The US sports don't have that, and so the incentive of the league and the ownership is very, very different, because it's either the tide rises and all the ships go, versus in Europe it's like, well, hold on, I could invest into this and be a part of it, and then I could be out next year and I've wasted all this time and money. So there's those types of challenges. I think culturally, there's probably also a big difference between Europe and the US. I think to Australia, the Europeans are more closely, especially the UK, more closely culturally aligned. I've I've tried to get a deal done in the US and, worked through some different people, got to a certain point and was basically told, well, unless you have an office in the US with US based staff, we just won't do the deal. And so I was like, oh God, I hadn't even, thought that could be a problem at some point. So yeah,
that is an interesting thing. That is an interesting line from a big company in sports because they do a lot of international business.
That's an example of one of the things that you work on something for months and you do, like we do a lot of work. We do a lot of visualization, a lot of prototyping to show people what the experience will look like. And then you end up meeting someone new at some point and look, if you talk to me when I was like, at the beginning of this, I would be really, really frustrated by that. These days it's kind of like, I don't know. It's just something that it's part of it. You have to sort of try and be as prepared for the unexpected as possible. I used to have a mentality of like, because it is such a roller coaster doing this sort of thing. And you go, I think my attitude at some point shifted from what could go wrong today, like, oh, poor me, to what is the challenge that presents itself today that I can try and overcome. And that gave me a lot of peace for one, and also gave me a different type of energy and drive to go, something is going to happen. How can I be ready for that and ready to kind of counter that? And so that's been pretty dramatic for me personally, and trying to have that be part of the culture in the business to go, hey, we could get promised the world and then it falls over at the last minute, and that's okay. We'll keep going. I've had some people say to me, what's your best business trait? And I'm like, I think it might be survivability. Like we just kind of like find a way, and and we sort of continue to navigate the space, and and the hope is that, and I think we're on the cusp of this right now, that we'll do some seriously cool stuff, have some great product in market. I can reward all the people that have supported me through this, from staff to investors, and and even just all the people around that have been really, really good on as part of that journey. It's what you need. It's no small feat to try and kind of do something like this, and the challenges will just keep pouring in, mate.
That they will, but survivability is definitely a good word. Adaptability is probably a softer word, you could probably say, but survivability is also a pretty important one in this industry. Now, so looking forward, and you talked about some, you're looking to get some wins this year and sort of keep momentum going with the changes you've made. Anything else on the horizon in terms of, is there anything you're working on within the existing product and offering that you think is going to be adding another layer to what you guys are doing, that another layer of value, or is it now what you've described so far, the core product, the nuts and bolts, the modules, etc., and that's the bit you're going to focus on really getting out to market?
No, I mean, one of the mandates to, we have a lady that works with us who is the head of emerging technology. That's her title. Her role is, the simple way to describe it is, I think we're here. I'm trying to think which way might be the appropriate way, but I reckon let's just say we're 3 years ahead of anyone else in this space. I'm pretty confident around that. But people will catch up quickly, and technology changes will allow them to catch up more quickly. And so that mandate is, how do you keep us 2-3 years ahead at a minimum? So we cannot rest on our laurels to say, we've got our core platform and that'll do. No way, just kind of keep pushing, keep driving. I've said to the team, we have a bunch of patents and some IP protection and whatever else. And I'm like, I don't see much value in it, to be fair, these days. I think, you can blow a lot of money on that stuff. I'd rather, the shift internally is to focus on a high innovation rate. So if someone wants to try and copy our stuff, go for it. You're going to be years behind us and we'll be further ahead at that point. To give you an idea on that, I think about, if we're generating an AI curated experience, that's super cool, but it becomes a navigationless experience, and that could be, like, it might get it wrong and it could kind of annoy a user. So how do you think about the solution out of that? So right now in the core platform, you're able to interact with the device and kind of see all of those tokens almost in like a social media feed. So you can then go, okay, you got it wrong, but this is what I actually wanted. But there could be a lot of tokens in there, right? So that could become a not a great kind of user experience. The next generation of our stuff, the stuff that we're working on now and is forthcoming, is voice. That's a big part, I think, of what we're going to do. So now you have that separation of like, it's AI curated, but if it gets it wrong, I can just tell you it's wrong and I can tell you what I wanted. I'll try and give you an example of that. And it also fixes a major UX issue that sits in this, if you want to understand the fandom side of things. So let's just use an NBA example again. Let's say I'm a fan, I like LeBron James. And if I want to, let's say he's shooting like really well today and he's got a bunch of 3-pointers. So I have this thought, which is, I wonder how he's gone the last few games. Is he having an anomaly today, or is this a build up, or what is it? So I'm curious about his 3-point shooting percentage. Right now, to use the NBA app as an example, I got to go out of the game, got to go find the calendar, then I got to find the previous game, then I got to find the Lakers, then I got to go to his stat line in the box score, and then I can see his 3-point shooting percentage. But if I want to know that over 5 games, I've now got to do that 5 times. Maybe I need a pen and paper. I'm going to write it down. And so that's a pretty clunky kind of process, but it's something I'm interested in. Now, all of that data exists. It's all there. And so, imagine if I can just say to the device, hey, show me LeBron James' last 5 games 3-point shooting percentage. And the AI can go and grab that, visualize it, which we can already do in our design system, in our adaptive UI, and then bring that straight into the experience. Now, the next generation of that's data. Think about that for content. LeBron James, just use the same example, gets a massive dunk. And I go, show me LeBron James' last 10 dunks. And it will go find the clips, put it into a new clip, pop it up into your device. So now you're going to get a really good understanding about what they want, like actually want, versus what you think they might want. That's where we're going with this stuff. That is that next generation of, one example of that. I mean, we've got a bucket load of ideas of stuff that we're sort of starting to work on. But that I think about that type of experience and go, that is really next level. I say this again, candidly, got to be careful, don't want to come across the wrong way. But I saw the Vision Pro stuff, all the sports apps, and I'm like, man, we built that in 2017 in VR. Like I could show people, even the design is nearly identical of what they're doing. And for us, that's 6 years ago. And so we've moved from there to understand what an experience should look like to take that next step. Now that Vision Pro is interesting, I still don't think it's necessarily the right thing for sport, to be fair. I think there's other use cases that make it an interesting product. But, some of the leagues that we're talking to, I'm like, if you want to see what could be done in that type of environment, like you should definitely be talking to us, because our thinking, even just from a creative perspective, is so far because we were doing that so long ago. And again, we were just way ahead of the market. We were putting that into a bunch of the older headsets, and it was super cool, but there was just no market there for it.
Being in front of the market is a constant, it's going to be a continued challenge, but I think it sounds like what I see across the industry is there's a much higher receptiveness and excitement and openness to look at new innovations across the industry. And that not only will lend itself well to you guys, but indeed, I think the industry as a whole, and indeed fans at the end of that, if we continue to see that foster. And you made some great points through our conversation and around how things like the conversation around AI is now fostering an interest from people within the industry to look at these types of things. So, Anne, look, I'm conscious. I think we've pretty much run out of time in this conversation. As I think it's about that lunchtime for you over there, and about bedtime for me. But it's been really great to hear what you guys have been up to and how you're tackling, the 2024 and beyond. It's clear that the industry does continue to need people like yourselves pushing the envelope, and look excited to see what's next. And obviously, we'll see each other in about a month's time. Actually, well, at the time of this recording. In New York, you'll be on stage showing the technology live in action. So if anyone's coming to the event, make sure you definitely not only join Anne's session, but make sure you get to the event as well. I think we're running actually a special offer, 20% off for anyone who puts the code in podcast on the ticketing platform as well. But yeah, see Ant on stage alongside some pretty big names, and that joint venture streaming platform will be a pretty hot topic there. I think we've got C-levels from all of their respective organizations on stage in different sessions. So those sessions are probably going to be pretty focused around one topic, I think, throughout the event. But anyway, really look forward to catching up with you. And thanks so much for joining us here, and look forward to catching up with you in New York as well.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate the chats always. And to your point, I will be in New York. And if anyone is listening to this or checking it out and wants to have a chat prior or when I'm there, please reach out. I'm pretty approachable and easygoing. Excited about what people are thinking about. Thank you, Nick.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of StreamTime. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the Sports Pro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the StreamTime podcast.